Well, hello everyone. Hope you're doing well. This is an important video in regards to the possible future direction of this channel. And I'm also going to be talking about some of the issues with the previous video that I uploaded with the interview with Laura Lynn. So the second section will be about the preamble to the show. And then we'll go into, in this third section, maybe kind of overview some of the information I shared in regards to modern Israel of today. So regarding this channel, I started it 4 years ago, roughly, and I did so in order to be able to do my effort to try and fight the corruption and the devastating destruction that is about to hit Canada, or is hitting Canada. And I wanted to fight back on that. And it also involved me running for the PPC in 2 federal elections. And that's how that kind of went. And over time, after the 2 elections, I started covering other topics and willing to kind of go on to the edge of things and explore territories. But one thing I did notice, though, as I did share some various different videos, is like, for instance, when I shared the 666 videos, I said, is it the mark of the beast? And there's 2 videos there and a lot of really good information, I believe, in there. And but I did notice that people were commenting and saying, we'd like to see a lot more of this type of content. And then also regarding the modern Israel interview I did with Laura, people were also mentioning that they wanted to hear more. And well, I have a kind of a unique perspective because for the last 40 years, I've been a Christian, and I've also looked at the whole New World Order rising issue. So a lot of experience, a lot of water has gone under the bridge, really. But yeah, so I guess the point is I'm asking, do you actually want me to go that direction? Do you want me to start injecting more Bible studies, things that would be of concern in relationship to, where we're headed and what's happening in the world? The thing is with doing that is it's going to require a lot more effort on my behalf. And, this channel actually has, it's just a tip of the iceberg, but it has taken a fair bit of time. Since the 2019 election, I really haven't worked in my trade. I've been, like many of you, I suppose, have just kind of gone on this trek to be able to try and save our country. And so it's been lean times for sure. And, eventually what I'm going to have to do is go back on the tools. And if I did do that, then, the work that I've been doing with the channel and also in the background, which is a considerable amount of work, that's going to just fade away because, you work a full day and you're tired, you go home and then you're kind of done. And so that's why I've gone as far as I have, just basically focusing in on trying to correct things. But, what we're against is formidable, and it is very comprehensive. And really, maybe the thing to do now is to do a heavier focus more on preparing ourselves for, to brace for impact, to be able to see the deceptions when they come. And really what's going on in the world is a biblical event, whether you like it or not, or the globalists, they're definitely tapped into spiritual entities that are giving them the direction as to where to go. And so it's important for us to be able to be armed equally ourselves. And I think I can offer a good contribution that way. So, but if I did do that, then I would need your support. If I become Pastor Ron, then it legitimizes being able to, if you're disillusioned with your church and you don't want to support that anymore, you could perhaps support me in my work and what I would be doing. So go ahead and make comments below. If you're someone who actually is a lurker and you haven't made really any comments, but you have feelings one way or the other about this channel, go ahead and make comments below. I want to see what you have to say, and I can choose accordingly. And if you really wanted to send a strong message, you know, I haven't done this before, but I'll set up a PayPal account down below. We can start with that. You can use your credit card through PayPal. You don't have to go ahead and, so if you would like to divert funds, you know, from something that you weren't really entirely happy with and want to send them this way, then I can know that, you know, I will have backing to go this direction. Now, what would happen is I would just start off, you know, fairly easy, you know, like maybe inject 1 or 2 videos a month in regards to biblical things, but I would also include other videos as well that I find pertinent. Okay, so that's an important issue here, and I can make a decision based on what you guys want to be able to say and show me. All right, okay, going on with the Laura Lynn interview. Yeah, you know, Laura Lynn kind of got blasted there by some of you folks, and you know, and I can kind of understand maybe from your perspective why that is. But if you understand the backstory of some of the things, then maybe it might help. For instance, when we were setting up for the show, I was working with Laura's husband, and the audio wasn't working. I couldn't get the audio to work here, and it was coming through my computer. Everything was good. And we jumped over the moon. I was actually mentally fatigued at the end. It was about an hour that we were jumping over the moon to try and get this thing to work. And it turned out that they needed to do a system reboot on their end. And they found out because not only was my audio not working, but the second guest had phoned in or come in, or not phoned in, but came into the chat there, and his audio wasn't working. So the system, they rebooted their system and the audio worked. So they rescheduled that fellow, you know, an hour later. And so in the interview, when it seemed like Laura just basically was cutting me off, well, maybe it was a convenient time to do so. But I mean, the thing is that fellow had rescheduled once before, and then he was, you know, coming in at the proper time. And so it was really, you know, the end of the show. And I shared basically mostly what I wanted to share anyhow. And the other thing too is that the show was actually going to be about Lahaina. I mean, when Lahaina fire happened, I created a show. It took me 2 days actually to put together the materials, and it had to do with Lahaina in relation to UNDRIP, United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which I have been, you know, one who's been forwarding that in Canada a fair bit. And also it was going to be an UNDRIP, you know, revisit, I guess, or update. And there's some amazing things that have been going along with that. But then, you know, it got rescheduled 4 or 5 times, actually, delayed, rescheduled, and finally, when the interview actually did happen, just this last few days, it ended up being that, well, what's the point of talking about Lahaina now when you got basically World War III on the, you know, happening there with what's happening with Israel. And I saw so many, you know, preachers talking about how we need to pray for Israel and support Israel and all of this. And I have a different take on the whole situation. So what I did 2 days prior to the actual interview is I changed it, and I started, you know, doing it. And I actually was working on it right up until the point when we did the interview. And normally what happens is I'll have my show notes, you know, where I'm going with it, and I'll send it to them, and then they can basically, because it's usually a live show, although this one wasn't, it was recorded. But you know, it gives them a heads up so Laura can know where to go with this whole thing. And but she didn't have that at all. So prior to the show, she was just, okay, so what are we talking about? So she was really running blind with the show. We talked about it, and we talked about different things, and then I did mention that, hey, I have a contrarian view on Israel. And she says, okay, well, that's fine. She kind of chuckled. She says, you know that, you know, I may want to counter that. And I said, oh, of course, it's no problem. So, and I think it was good to see her counter because, I mean, she's presenting, you know, a belief system that a lot of people are believing, I guess, falling into, because it's taught everywhere. And like I mentioned in the video, you know, it's taught in all of these different seminaries, which, you know, are I find to be Jesuit influenced, as this is a Jesuit theology and agenda. But as I shared in the video. So I would say, like, cut her some slack, because I did catch her completely off guard. And I know that she has a deep, belief system in Israel, modern Israel, fulfilling the prophecies of Ezekiel 8 and such, or 38, sorry. And so that's that. So there's a whole preamble there that people don't know about. And like I said, I was mentally drained even just going into the interview there. But yeah, I kind of interrupted too much. And oh well, it is what it is. Okay, so let's kind of talk about this issue of modern Israel. And okay, like I said, I'm seeing all of these pastors going on talking about, this is modern Israel's being attacked. It's a fulfillment of Ezekiel 38 and Zechariah as well, and some Psalms they'll quote as well. And over the years, I've seen people give this narrative, and I just kind of blew it off, because it just, is, I always knew that Israel was a setup, right? The thing that has to be understood here is that, you have to look at the context of Ezekiel. He was giving a warning to the people that they need to surrender to the Babylonians. The Babylonians are going to come in there, and we're going to go into captivity. We're going to be punished for the sins that we're doing as a nation or as a group of people. What happened there is that's exactly, the Babylonians did come in there, and actually the Ark of the Covenant was secreted away. And it's in a cave someplace. It hasn't been found yet that anyone knows about. And everything was sacked. And Solomon's temple was destroyed too, and everything. So when he's talking about the regathering of Israel, a lot of it, basically has to do with what happened after their captivity. Because when Babylon was sacked itself by the Medes and the Persians, then there was a decree to go ahead and to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. So with that, I mean, the Jews were scattered all over the place too, as well, the ones that did escape, and they regathered, and they came from Babylon, and they went and rebuilt everything. And the temple that Jesus, walked into is what was built after that. So there's an immediate context to Ezekiel, but there's also another context. And this actually brings up a point where I see a lot of these pastors, what they'll do is they'll lift, just Bible verses, and then they'll go and run with it in a modern context. For instance, people were trying to identify what 666 was. And I remember way back in the 80s, they were talking about Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. He drove a Mercedes sports car, and it had a license plate 666 on it. Is this the beast? Is he the mark of the beast? And instead of, what should be done is they should actually go through the Bible and find out what the Bible has to say about the subject. And then you can go out and look in the world, type of thing, instead of just running with one or two passages. Although I have seen people go with many passages, but they start off with the wrong premise to begin with, or somewhere along the line they end up, diverting. You have to, when people are teaching these things, you as a watcher, you have to ask God for wisdom to be able to discern what is being said here, because truth can lie very close to error. So what is important to understand here is that when you look at Ezekiel 38 as an example, where else in the Bible does it talk about a similar situation? And that's in Revelation chapter 20. And it's talking about after the 1,000 years, and it's talking about Gog and Magog and a war. And it's basically the final end of Armageddon, really. Fire comes down out of heaven and destroys, all those who encamp around the city or the saints. And then in Revelation 21, there's a new earth, and a new heaven and a new Jerusalem. So when it talks about praying for Jerusalem, praying for Israel, and these types of things, it's not just talking about a future modern Israel like we see now. It's talking about in the final end too, is when this whole, it's talking about the salvation of humanity. Really, the New Jerusalem is a group of people of the world who've been saved. So just because we see a modern Israel, and you have all of these preachers, going on and telling us that this is a fulfillment of prophecy, doesn't mean that we have to believe it. You have to challenge these things and not just go along with it. And as I mentioned in the video, it was basically the globalists, the Rothschilds and the, Winston Churchill. Even Hitler himself was, cattle shooting Jews over to that area. And the United Nations, all of that is a globalist entity. Now people say, okay, it can still be, God can use Nebuchadnezzar, he can use the UN. Yes, of course. But you have to understand that when they went and set up Israel as a nation, they just didn't set it up and just say, well, hats off to you, make the best of it. No, they had their hands all through that thing. And they still do today. They control it. And when you go ahead and actually look at how Israel was created to begin with, it had to do with Jacob, and he was going to get, assassinated by his brother. He was all stressed out, and he struggled with the angel all night, and he says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And then in the end, he says, you shall not be called Jacob anymore, the deceiver. You'll be called Israel, right? And so Israel is actually a person who's an overcomer. That's what Israel is. So it's not a nation. It wasn't created as a nation. Jacob didn't become a nation. He didn't run a country. He basically became an overcomer. And so as time went on, God was basically leading his people in a theocracy, like when they came out of Egypt. And as they, finally came to the promised land, they wanted to be like the nations around them. So they wanted a king. And God didn't want them to have a king. It was an insult to him. God wanted the people to have their own direct connection with God, that they can move as one, as they're connected to God. So reluctantly, Saul was given to them as a king. He stood taller than everyone else, and he was, a pretty magnificent specimen of a man, I guess. And people said, yeah, let's go with this. But, it was warned that, if you go ahead and do this, then you're going to be taxed, and you're going to have the women taken away, and all kinds of selfishness is going to come in with these kings. And so to think about, okay, if God is the one who's creating modern Israel today, and you have a kind of a king's situation, not even anything close to what the theocracy was of old, God wouldn't be in that at all. It doesn't make any sense. But Israel, did become basically a nation of people, and they had their kings and all of these kinds of things. But like I pointed out, it's very important to factor in the prophecy in Daniel 9:24 to 9:27. And it's not an easy prophecy just to go and pick up and say, yeah, I get it. But, it's from the proclamation to restore and rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. And then the 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. So, is it 70 literal weeks and whatnot? And so when you look in the Bible, you see that God can use a day for a year interpretation. When you go and take 70 weeks times 7 days in a week, you end up with 490. And if you're going to apply, you could, apply that prophecy on its own in 490 years, and people have done it, but it doesn't really make any sense. If you go ahead and use the day for a year principle, and try that, then you end up with 490 years. And if you go from that time on and you keep it as a linear prophecy, it takes you right up to the time when Messiah will be cut off at the end of the 69 weeks. And in the midst of the 70th week, the sanctuary services, the sacrifices end. And that's when Christ is, crucified on the cross. He's the Lamb of God. It's the most important event in human history, right? And the veil was rent, from top to bottom in the sanctuary, separating the most holy and the holy place. And if a priest was to rend his garments, it means to rip it, to pull it apart, to rip it, he becomes unholy at that point in time. And so same thing with the sanctuary. It was done. There's no point of doing any more animal sacrifices, because all of that whole sanctuary service was a type pointing to the antitype, which is Christ, when he was crucified and died, the lamb, slain for the foundation of the world, to save humanity. And you also have basically in Matthew 23, Jesus is talking about woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees. You killed the prophets and all these different woes onto them. In the end, he says, your house is left unto you desolate. And that word desolate is very important because, actually, if you study with the King James Bible, and I would recommend if you're going to do any kind of serious study, that's the Bible to use because you'll go 10 times farther than, let's say, if you're using an NIV. The consistency of words and just it's amazing how you can get so much more out of a Bible study using the King James over these modern translations. So that word desolate is very important because if you go back to Daniel, we'll step ahead in Matthew 24 when Jesus talks about the abomination of desolation and he refers back to Daniel. I believe that's 24:15. So what is that desolation talking about? It goes exactly back to Daniel 9:27, where it talks about, being desolate at the end of, verse 27. So all of these things tie together. So this was a 490-year probationary period for, the nation of Israel. And that basically ended with the stoning of Stephen in AD 34. And you go and read about, what Stephen had to say, basically, and he's, calling him out. And they wouldn't have it. They wouldn't repent, and they went and killed him. And then finally in 70 AD, the Romans sacked and destroyed Jerusalem, and the temple was not one rock upon the other, and the whole deal. And many Jewish people, rabbis would say that even today that that was it. That was the probation ended, and there is no more Israel. So now we have this modern Israel that has popped up in 1948. And when you look at this creation that's done by the globalists, now what would be the purpose of creating such a thing? If you're going to look at this, now we talk about many times about the New World Order, the World Economic Forum, the global control, loss of freedoms, and all of these things, and all of that is horrific and whatnot. But the real target, the crosshairs, are on true Christianity, because true Christianity is a way of salvation for humanity. And Jesus said in Matthew 24, be not deceived, make sure you're not deceived, many will come in my name, and if you see him out in the desert, don't go and see him. So that's a very strong warning for the future, because I believe that Lucifer will impersonate Christ in the not too distant future. And he will, walk around on the earth, and Jesus is saying, don't even go out there, it's not me, but it's going to seem like it's him. It's going to be, he's going to be able to solve the world's problems. He's going to bring all the religions of the world together in harmony if you're willing to compromise your Christian beliefs, right? So you have to factor in this whole thing when you're looking at modern Israel being created, not just to blindly say it's because God created it. But look on the flip side, okay? Does Satan have an agenda? Is he trying to trick or fool or deceive Christians? And I believe he is, And then when you go and look at the fact that it was Jesuit Francisco Ribera who come up with futurism, and he's the one who butchered the time prophecy in Daniel 9:27, and separating the 70th week from the rest of the time prophecy. He replaced Christ's crucifixion and death for humanity with the Antichrist in midweek. Just think about, the blasphemy of that just alone. And that was to take the heat off of the papacy, because, the reformers back in the day, they were pointing to the papacy as being the Antichrist. So by coming up with this futuristic view of the 70th week and saying, in the midweek, it's going to be the Antichrist is going to come up, and that's way in the future. So the papacy is not the Antichrist. And this became a very popular teaching as the Catholic Church, took it on and went with it. And then it's been developed even more, because what they've done now is they've actually added to that this whole issue of a pre-trib, rapture. And that was heavily pushed. I went to different churches in the 80s, actually, and I watched these different movies. It was being presented everywhere, and everyone was just, gobbling it up, It was very low on substance biblically, but it was, glamorized or not glamorized, but I mean, it was heavily pushed forward in movies and whatever indoctrination. And so now you got this whole issue of the saints will be raptured before the tribulation happens, and then they're going to have a temple worship, and the temple is going to be created and animal sacrifices, and they even have, the half a dozen or more red heifers, that are needed for this whole thing to kick off. They got all of the vessels ready and everything else. So how can this actually be deception for Christians? If you buy into this issue of, Israel is fulfillment of prophecy and God's behind it, and we are to pray for Israel, which we are to, but the Israel is not the modern nation of Israel. Israel is basically God's people now, there's a Romans chapter 2, 9, and 11 talking about these things. I would say that if you're on the side where you've believed all of that, then go ahead and talk to God about it and challenge the situation. I do it all the time on everything I believe. Is this truly what the truth is? Because I'm a truth seeker, and so ask God: is modern Israel truly? Did you set it up? Can you help me to understand? Can you lead and guide my mind, and have an open mind to the to what I'm saying as an example. When you factor in Revelation 20 and 21, I mean, here you have, this issue being brought forth, from Ezekiel 38. So, yeah, okay, so that's, probably enough on that topic. I mean, I could go into it more, do real Bible study, but this is long enough. What I wanted to do really is just give an overview on it so that people can go and study it out themselves and consider these things. And I know it's not a popular view because most people believe, well, not most, but I mean, a lot of Christians believe in this whole thing of modern Israel. So anyhow, I would just say that, keep an open mind, talk to God about it, and you can go forward with that. And keep foremost in your mind that we are warned in the Bible not to be deceived. And, people are deceived, because they have their guard down or they don't see something, right? And the Bible talks about even if it was possible, the very elect would be deceived. The very elect, the people who are really following God. So this is no, kindergarten playground here. And it's going to take a very close relationship with God and to understand really what He's directing and telling us. And the stakes are high, it's our very salvation at hand. So be careful with those preachers out there, especially the ones that are very popular. For wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction.